June 6, 1944, dawned with the first faint streaks of morning light painting the skies above Normandy. A Waco CG-4A glider, a silent behemoth of canvas and wood, severed its connection to its tow plane at a lofty 800 feet. Within its Spartan interior, a Willis M.B. Jeep, a formidable 2,450 pounds of resilient steel, robust rubber, and a potent engine, lay firmly secured to the floor. The glider pilot, a figure of intense concentration, grappled with the control yoke as the verdant hedgerows of the French countryside surged rapidly upwards to greet them. The ensuing impact was sudden and violent. The glider's fuselage contorted into an accordion-like crumple, its fabric tearing with a visceral shriek, and its wooden spars exploded into a multitude of sharp splinters. As the dust, thick and choking, began to settle, an almost unbelievable sound emerged. The Jeep's engine sputtered to life. Miraculously, the vehicle extricated itself from the shattered remains of the glider, its suspension system remarkably intact, its steering entirely responsive, poised and ready to transport troops deeper inland, while the German forces were still in disarray, struggling to formulate a coherent response. This extraordinary outcome was not merely a stroke of fortune. It was the direct result of an engineering triumph, a feat that the United States Army Air Forces had, only 18 months prior, derided as a profligate squandering of vital wartime resources. Across the expansive English Channel on that very morning, more than 1,400 Jeeps experienced similarly jarring and forceful introductions into occupied French territory. Gliders plummeted headfirst into unforgiving stone walls, executed jarring belly flops into waterlogged fields, and cartwheeled with uncontrolled abandon across pastoral landscapes. The aircraft themselves were deemed expendable, conceived with the understanding of their one-way mission. However, the Jeeps, they were designed for survival. They absolutely had to emerge functional from crashes that utterly annihilated the gliders that bore them. Conventional military wisdom declared this an impossibility. One simply does not devise a method to protect a vehicle against forces potent enough to tear an aircraft asunder. The theoretical calculations did not align with such a possibility. The requisite materials were ostensibly unavailable. And yet, there they were, these indomitable vehicles, traversing the narrow lanes of Norman villages, the smoldering wreckage of their delivery conveyances burning conspicuously in their wake. The visionary individual responsible for this monumental achievement was not a high-ranking general, nor was he a seasoned military engineer with decades of specialized ordnance experience. He was a civilian, a man whom the Army had unceremoniously dismissed in 1942, a consultant they had disparaged as an eccentric dreamer who failed to grasp the pragmatic limitations of the real world. His name was Palmer Costlett Putnam, and his unwavering dedication to a problem that no one else seemed inclined to solve ultimately revolutionized the very nature of airborne warfare. However, what truly distinguishes this narrative from the conventional accounts of military innovation is its unique twist. Putnam's design was so audacious, so fundamentally at odds with established military doctrine, that even after its resounding success in rigorous testing, the Quartermaster Corps made concerted efforts to suppress its existence. They harbored legitimate anxieties concerning the substantial material expenditures during a period of stringent wartime rationing, about potential bottlenecks in production, and about the complexities of field maintenance. Furthermore, there was an undeniable undercurrent of institutional pride at play, a reluctance to concede that an external individual had successfully resolved a conundrum that their own highly trained engineers had found insurmountable. Such an admission was profoundly unpalatable. This, then, is the compelling chronicle of how sheer desperation ultimately triumphed over entrenched ego. It elucidates how one man's ostensibly extravagant design became the pivotal factor distinguishing between Allied mobility and an unforgivable Allied stagnation in the critical hours following D-Day. It illuminates the often overlooked logistical intricacies that typically elude combat footage, the unglamorous yet utterly crucial engineering feats that ultimately dictate whether armies achieve forward momentum or become hopelessly mired. The genesis of this remarkable tale lies in comprehending why, in 1942, every recognized expert within the U.S. military establishment considered the notion of airdropping fully functional jeeps to be nothing more than a fantastical delusion. Palmer Coslet Putnam, by all outward appearances, did not embody the image of a man destined to revolutionize military logistics. Born in 1900 into a prominent publishing family in the bustling metropolis of New York, he had dedicated the 1930s to pursuing ambitious wind energy initiatives in the serene landscapes of Vermont, meticulously designing experimental turbines that established utility companies, with polite but firm deference, chose to disregard. He possessed an advanced engineering degree from the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an inherently restless and inquisitive intellect, and a well-earned reputation for approaching intractable problems from decidedly unconventional perspectives. With the outbreak of hostilities in Europe, Putnam perceived a unique opportunity to contribute his considerable talents. He proactively approached the War Department in early 1941, presenting detailed proposals for innovative airborne supply systems. The Army, at that time overwhelmed by a deluge of defense contractors and self-proclaimed visionaries, simply categorized his correspondence under the generic heading of unsolicited civilian submissions. Then came the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, the military's previously rigid stance regarding external ideas underwent a dramatic transformation. The Army Air Forces had committed to an unprecedented and massive expansion of its airborne divisions, comprising elite paratroopers, whose mission was to seize strategic bridges and crucial crossroads well in advance of the main ground forces. However, a critical and glaring flaw existed within this doctrine. Paratroopers were, by their very nature, light infantry. They descended with only their personal rifles, a few machine guns, and perhaps a handful of mortars, conspicuously lacking any vehicles, artillery, or the capacity for sustained heavy firepower. Once they had landed, they were effectively isolated and vulnerable until ground units could successfully link up with them. The German Wehrmacht had painfully learned this exact lesson during their arduous invasion of Crete in May 1941, where German paratroopers sustained appallingly high casualties before desperately needed reinforcements could finally arrive. American military planners were unequivocally resolved not to replicate that costly error. The seemingly obvious solution presented itself: gliders. These ingenious engineless aircraft possessed the capability to be towed behind larger transport planes, subsequently released over designated landing zones, and thereby deliver heavier and more substantial equipment. The British military was already actively experimenting with their Horsa glider, a craft capable of transporting either a jeep or a light artillery piece. The Americans, in turn, developed the Waco CG-4A, an impressive glider engineered to haul a formidable 3,750 pounds of cargo. Problem ostensibly resolved, one might assume? Not by any stretch of the imagination. Engineers swiftly recognized that the combination of gliders and jeeps constituted a truly catastrophic pairing. A jeep, fully fueled and equipped, weighed a substantial 2,450 pounds. During a glider landing, which was, in essence, a meticulously controlled crash, the vehicle transformed into an unyielding battering ram. If it were secured using conventional methods, The immense impact forces would either violently rip the Jeep from its moorings, sending it careening destructively through the glider's fuselage, or the extreme deceleration shock would warp its sturdy frame, shatter its crucial axles, and reduce its robust engine block to a mere pile of scrap metal. The Quartermaster Corps, recognizing the gravity of the situation, assigned their most proficient engineers to tackle this formidable problem in mid-1942. They experimented with reinforced tie-downs, but the Jeep still sustained irreparable damage. They attempted to cushion the landing gear contact points, yet the frame continued to twist beyond recognition. They even tried reducing fuel loads in an effort to decrease overall weight, but the Jeep invariably arrived as nothing more than junk. After a frustrating 6 months of consistent failures, the official recommendation was to completely abandon the concept of Jeep delivery by glider and instead concentrate on smaller, lighter cargo that could more effectively withstand the rigors of rough landings. However, airborne commanders vehemently opposed this recommendation, arguing forcefully that without mobile firepower and reliable transportation, their highly trained troops would face certain annihilation. A seemingly insurmountable stalemate had been reached. This was the precise predicament when Palmer Putnam made his appearance at Wright Field, Ohio, in December 1942. He had, through informal channels, become aware that the military was grappling with a significant vehicle delivery challenge and firmly believed he possessed a viable solution. The engineering officers who convened with him were profoundly skeptical from the very outset. Putnam was not advocating for incrementally improved tie-downs or marginally stronger glider frames. His radical proposal involved constructing a colossal wooden crate around each individual Jeep, a specialized container designed to absorb the brutal impact forces through a process of controlled, deliberate destruction. The quartermaster officers, with their keen understanding of logistics and resources, immediately performed the necessary calculations. Putnam's innovative design would necessitate 200 board feet of plywood for each Jeep, in addition to steel cable and specialized assembly procedures. Multiplying this by the thousands of Jeeps required, one quickly realized that such a demand for materials could otherwise be allocated to constructing vital barracks, essential landing craft, or critical aircraft components. In the midst of the most severe material shortages in American history, Putnam was proposing a protective crate that would cost nearly as much as the invaluable vehicle it contained. They courteously extended their gratitude for his time and promptly sent him back home. Officially, Palmer Putnam's groundbreaking proposal was formally rejected on January 8, 1943. The Army, they declared, would undoubtedly discover an alternative method. Except, there was no viable alternative, and this stark reality was implicitly understood by everyone involved. To fully grasp why Putnam's idea initially appeared utterly insane requires a fundamental comprehension of the intricate physics involved in glider crashes. A fully loaded Waco CG-4A glider approached its designated landing zone at an approximate speed of 70 miles per hour, descending at a remarkably steep angle due to the absence of an engine to modulate its descent. Pilots, under ideal conditions, aim for expansive, open fields, but in the chaotic and unpredictable environment of combat, characterized by treacherous hedgerows, extensively cratered terrain, and incessant enemy fire, they were compelled to utilize whatever patch of ground presented itself. The instant the glider's landing skids made contact with the earth, the deceleration was anything but gradual. It was unequivocally violent. In a mere second, the glider transitioned from highway speed to an abrupt, complete halt. The forces unleashed were not measured in gentle G-forces, akin to a car braking smoothly. They were, instead, devastating collision forces, the kind that mercilessly crumpled hardened steel. For the Jeep confined within, this created a multitude of critical failure points. Firstly, there was the inexorable force of inertia. Newton's first law of motion, an immutable principle, held no regard for military necessity. That 2,450-pound vehicle desperately sought to continue its forward trajectory at 70 miles per hour, even after the glider itself had come to a grinding halt. Standard cargo straps, even those of military-grade quality specifically rated for aircraft use, would invariably snap under such immense load or violently rip their anchor points clean out of the glider's wooden floor. Engineers meticulously calculated that keeping a Jeep completely stationary during such an impact demanded restraints capable of withstanding an astonishing 15,000 pounds of instantaneous force. Constructing tie-downs of such formidable strength would necessitate reinforcing the entire glider cargo bay, which, in turn, would add substantial weight, consequently reducing the already critical payload capacity, thereby utterly defeating the original purpose. The second formidable problem was that even if one could miraculously prevent the Jeep from moving, the sheer deceleration forces would still utterly destroy the vehicle itself. One might vividly imagine bolting a Jeep securely to an unyielding concrete wall, and then slamming that wall into the Jeep at 70 miles per hour. This analogy functionally encapsulates what transpired during an exceptionally hard glider landing. The Jeep's frame would flex far beyond its engineered tolerance limits. Suspension components, meticulously designed to absorb minor bumps and moderate jumps, not instantaneous stops, would shear violently from their mounting points. The engine, typically resting on resilient rubber mounts to dampen vibrations during normal operation, would transform into a 400-pound wrecking ball, tearing loose from its moorings and obliterating everything in its immediate vicinity. Transmissions would crack under the strain, axles would bend irrevocably, and wheels would catastrophically break off their hubs. The third significant issue stemmed from the inherently unpredictable nature of the landing itself. A theoretically perfect glider approach onto impeccably flat ground might generate survivable forces, but combat landings were, by their very definition, far from perfect. Gliders frequently struck concealed ditches and unceremoniously nosed over, slamming their precious cargo violently forward into the cockpit bulkhead. They often encountered capricious crosswinds and rolled uncontrollably sideways, tumbling the cargo within like clothes in a churning dryer. They frequently collided with unforeseen obstacles, towering trees, sturdy fence posts, or abandoned farm equipment, and consequently disintegrated in an asymmetrical and devastating fashion. Indeed, disintegrated in an uneven fashion. Throughout the training maneuvers conducted in North Carolina during 1942, the venerable 82nd Airborne Division meticulously documented a disheartening survival rate for their Jeeps, plummeting below a mere 30%. A staggering 70% of these indispensable vehicles, painstakingly delivered by glider, sustained damages so severe that they were rendered inoperable. Some were complete and utter write-offs, beyond any hope of repair, while others demanded countless hours of arduous field repairs, a luxury that the brutal crucible of combat conditions simply would not afford. The collective wisdom of the engineering community reached a resounding and unambiguous consensus. It was an insurmountable challenge to conceive a restraint system capable of encompassing every conceivable crash scenario. The sheer multitude of variables involved was too vast, the destructive forces unleashed too extreme and unpredictable. What the military urgently required was an innovative methodology to render the Jeep itself impervious to the relentless onslaught of crash forces, to somehow disengage the vehicle from the swirling maelstrom of chaos that invariably surrounded it during these violent impacts. But the perplexing question remained: how could such a feat be accomplished? One could hardly encase a rugged Jeep in a delicate shroud of bubble wrap. Nor could it be enveloped in a sufficient quantity of protective padding without inflating the overall package to an unwieldy size, rendering it too cumbersome for the glider's limited cargo bay. Furthermore, a wholesale redesign of the Jeep itself was entirely out of the question. Willis Overland Motors was already operating at its maximum production capacity, churning out these vital machines, and any proposed design modifications would inevitably bring the entire production line to a grinding halt for many months, a delay the war effort could ill afford. Several ingenious engineers put forth an alternative proposition: to construct specialized airborne Jeeps, fortified with reinforced frames and ruggedized components, specifically tailored for aerial deployment. However, this visionary concept ultimately foundered and went nowhere. The projected costs were astronomical, soaring to prohibitive levels, and the extended production timeline was deemed utterly unacceptable in the face of imminent wartime demands. Even these specially reinforced Jeeps, despite their enhanced durability, would still inevitably suffer catastrophic damage when subjected to the most severe and unforgiving crashes. Other innovative minds put forward the suggestion of parachute delivery, envisioning Jeeps being carefully dropped from low altitudes on colossal cargo chutes. Initial test drops showed considerable promise, offering a glimmer of hope, until, with alarming frequency, Jeeps began landing in treacherous rivers, entangled in dense tree canopies, or, even more perilously, directly within enemy positions, with absolutely no viable means of retrieval. Gliders, at the very least, possessed the distinct advantage of placing the crucial vehicle precisely where the eager troops most urgently required it. By the early months of 1943, this seemingly intractable impasse had escalated into a full-blown crisis, threatening to derail critical military objectives. Operation Husky, the ambitious invasion of Sicily, loomed large on the horizon, inexorably scheduled for July. Airborne divisions were slated to spearhead this audacious assault, and they desperately, acutely, required robust vehicle support to ensure the success of their mission. Commanders found themselves confronted with the grim prospect of dispatching their brave paratroopers into the throes of combat burdened by the same debilitating mobility disadvantage that had exacted such a heavy and devastating toll on the Germans during the Battle of Crete. The Quartermaster Corps, a vital logistical arm of the military, had, by this juncture, completely exhausted its reservoir of ideas and innovative solutions. It was at this critical juncture that someone serendipitously recalled the eccentric civilian engineer from Vermont, known for his unconventional and seemingly wasteful crate design. Palmer Putnam's ingenious crate was not, by any conventional definition, a crate in the traditional sense of the word. Rather, it was a meticulously conceived destruction machine, exquisitely engineered to systematically tear itself apart in a precisely choreographed sequence. When military engineers, finally examining his intricate blueprints in February 1944, doing so reluctantly and under considerable pressure from insistent airborne commanders, they discovered a design that flagrantly violated every established principle of cargo packaging they had diligently learned and rigorously applied. Standard military containers were robustly constructed with the singular purpose of protecting their precious contents through sheer strength, employing rigid walls designed to staunchly resist any deformation. Putnam's radical design, however, embraced an antithetical philosophy. It was intentionally built to collapse, to crumple, to absorb the brutal energy of impact by systematically disintegrating in a controlled and predictable manner. This groundbreaking concept ingeniously borrowed from a fundamental principle that would not achieve mainstream recognition and become a cornerstone of automotive safety doctrine for another 2 eventful decades: the revolutionary concept of crumple zones. The foundational structure of this innovative crate utilized sturdy plywood panels, each a precise 3/4 of an inch thick, meticulously arranged in an intricate honeycomb pattern around the precious Jeep. However, these were not merely solid, unyielding walls. Putnam had ingeniously engineered them with deliberate weak points, strategically scored sections designed to buckle and give way under specific, predetermined load thresholds. One might visualize it as a sophisticated wooden accordion, meticulously designed to compress in distinct, sequential stages. The outermost panels were engineered to fail first, heroically absorbing the initial, brutal shock of the impact. As these outer layers collapsed inward, they seamlessly triggered the successive failure of secondary panels, which, in turn, absorbed the subsequent wave of destructive energy. By the time the formidable forces of the crash finally reached the Jeep itself, their potency had been judiciously dissipated through multiple, cascading layers of progressive destruction. In essence, the crate nobly sacrificed itself, its own structural integrity, so that the invaluable vehicle within could emerge unscathed and fully functional. Intricately woven through the structure of the crate, a complex web of steel cables ran, connecting the floor assembly to the roof panels with meticulous precision. These specialized cables were endowed with a specific, calibrated tension rating. During the course of normal handling and transport, they remained sufficiently loose, allowing for a slight degree of inherent flexibility within the structure. However, in the violent event of a crash, these cables instantly went taut, dramatically transforming into powerful energy limiters, expertly preventing the crate from collapsing too rapidly and indiscriminately. Had the structure failed with excessive speed, the entirety of the impact energy would have simultaneously assaulted the Jeep, rendering the innovative design no different from a conventional, unprotected crash. Conversely, if the collapse had unfolded too slowly, the crate would not have compressed sufficiently before the glider inevitably struck secondary obstacles, negating its protective benefits. Putnam, with his unparalleled engineering acumen, had meticulously calculated the exact gauge of the cable and the precise tension required to effectively spread the deceleration forces over an approximate duration of 0.2 of a second. This minuscule fraction of time, this fleeting moment, proved to be the pivotal difference between a hopelessly bent axle and a fully functional, combat-ready vehicle. The floor assembly of the crate exhibited an equally sophisticated and ingenious design. Instead of being rigidly mounted directly to the glider deck, the entire crated package rested upon an intricate system of wooden skids, which were ingeniously connected by a series of specialized shear pins. These meticulously designed pins were engineered to snap precisely at predetermined force levels, thereby allowing the entire package to slide forward by several crucial feet during the impact, even as the glider around it came to an abrupt and instantaneous halt. This controlled sliding motion further extended the crucial deceleration time, mitigating the destructive forces. One might conceptualize this mechanism as akin to an aircraft carrier's sophisticated arresting cable system, with the notable distinction that instead of gradually bringing a high-speed aircraft to a halt, Putnam's system was expertly decelerating a Jeep gradually, while everything else in its immediate vicinity was stopping instantly and violently. Intriguingly, within the confines of the crate, the Jeep itself was not secured in the conventional, rigid fashion. Instead, Putnam had devised its own independent suspension system, strategically placed rubber blocks positioned at specific, critical points on the vehicle's frame, held securely in place by wooden brackets that were designed to deliberately break away under conditions of extreme load. The Jeep, in essence, floated within the protective embrace of the crate, cushioned and protected on all sides. During the violent dynamics of a crash, the outer crate collapsed inward with purposeful design, but concurrently, the resilient rubber blocks compressed, adding yet another vital layer of sophisticated energy absorption. The sheer brilliance of Putnam's design lay unequivocally in its meticulously orchestrated sequencing. The outer panels failed in a controlled manner, the steel cables stretched to their calculated limits, the floor's skids slid forward progressively, the inner brackets broke away as intended, and the rubber blocks compressed simultaneously, all unfolding in a perfectly synchronized cascade that masterfully transformed one massive, potentially catastrophic impact into a series of smaller, sequentially absorbed, and ultimately survivable impacts. The Quartermaster Corps engineers, those astute individuals tasked with reviewing this groundbreaking design, readily grasped its theoretical elegance and profound ingenuity. However, they also acutely understood the practical nightmare it presented. Each individual crate demanded an astonishing 220 board feet of aircraft-grade plywood, a material so stringently rationed during wartime that numerous furniture manufacturers had been summarily shut down to preserve the dwindling supply for critical military applications. The inclusion of the specialized steel cable added another significant 40 pounds to the weight of each crate. Furthermore, the vital rubber blocks competed directly with the already strained production of essential tires for military vehicles. The meticulous assembly process required highly skilled carpenters, working with unwavering precision from exact specifications, leaving absolutely no margin for error in either panel thickness or cable tension. And here was the aspect that truly exasperated and galled the military logistics officers. The crate was fundamentally a single-use item. After a solitary landing, it was irrevocably transformed into mere scrap wood. There was no possibility of salvaging its components, no chance of reusing it for subsequent deliveries. Every Jeep successfully delivered meant another crate irretrievably destroyed. When Putnam presented his comprehensive cost analysis, the numbers were unequivocally damning. Each crate was projected to cost approximately $180 to construct. The Jeep nestled inside, by comparison, cost $738. This meant that an additional 24% was being appended to the vehicle's original price, solely for the purpose of its packaging. Multiply that staggering figure by the 10,000 Jeeps the Army ambitiously planned to deliver by glider over the course of the subsequent year, and one arrived at a staggering sum of $1.8 million purely for packaging, an amount roughly equivalent to an astounding $31 million in today's currency, all expended on wooden boxes destined to be abandoned in the fields of France. The Quartermaster General, in a moment of exasperation, famously declared it the most expensive kindling in the annals of military history. Nevertheless, airborne commanders, acutely aware of the grim casualty projections for operations conducted without adequate vehicle support, made their unwavering position unequivocally clear: either expend the necessary funds, or face the inevitable cancellation of the crucial airborne missions. The weighty decision ultimately ascended the chain of command, reaching the highest echelons of the War Department. In March 1943, despite every bureaucratic instinct screaming a resounding "No!", they reluctantly authorized immediate field testing of Putnam's radical design. Wright Field, Ohio. April 1943. The ambitious testing program commenced not with the deployment of expensive gliders, but rather with a series of simpler, more controlled drop tests conducted from towering wooden structures. Engineers, ever cautious, were understandably unwilling to risk valuable gliders and highly trained pilots on an unproven and potentially disastrous concept. They meticulously constructed a 15-foot platform, carefully loaded a crated Jeep onto a sophisticated release mechanism, and then allowed the inexorable force of gravity to perform its work. The initial drop utilized a prototype crate, with Putnam himself personally supervising the assembly, having traveled from Vermont at his own expense, consumed by a fierce determination to prove the skeptics unequivocally wrong. The crated Jeep impacted the ground with a resounding thud. The crate itself exploded into myriad splinters, precisely as its ingenious design intended. And when the debris was finally cleared, the vehicle, to the astonishment of all present, started flawlessly on the very first crank. Engineers meticulously checked the frame with precision levels and measuring tools. There was no discernible distortion, and the suspension remained entirely intact. One officer present, later recounting the event in his official report, confessed that he had fully anticipated a catastrophic disaster, yet instead bore witness to something that utterly defied common sense. Encouraged by these initial successes, they progressively increased the drop height to 20 feet, and then further to 25 feet. Each subsequent test involved new crates and fresh Jeeps. The remarkable results remained consistently positive, reinforcing the efficacy of the design. However, the quartermaster observers, ever diligent, were not entirely satisfied with the limited scope of simple tower drops. Real-world glider impacts invariably involve significant horizontal velocity, not merely the isolated force of vertical impact. They encompass complex dynamics such as sliding, tumbling, and the application of asymmetric loads. While the tower tests conclusively proved the crate's ability to withstand straight-down impacts, combat scenarios, they rightly reasoned, would rarely present such a straightforward challenge. Consequently, in May, the testing program transitioned to its next, more ambitious phase, actual glider crashes. It was at this juncture that the entire undertaking became both considerably more expensive and inherently more dangerous. The test protocol devised for this phase was nothing short of brutal. A crated Jeep would be carefully loaded into a CG-4A glider, which would then be towed to an altitude of 800 feet. Upon reaching the designated landing zone, the glider would be released, and the pilot would be instructed to bring it down with deliberate force, making a hard landing. These were not the gentle, controlled approaches that pilots would attempt under ideal conditions. Instead, these were meticulously orchestrated worst-case scenarios. Pilots received explicit instructions to simulate the harsh realities of combat landings, steep approaches, high-speed touchdowns, and landings on unforgiving, rough terrain. Wright Field had meticulously prepared several distinct landing zones, each presenting varying conditions: freshly plowed earth, densely packed clay, and a particularly challenging zone deliberately littered with logs, artfully arranged to simulate the obstacles presented by hedgerows. 2. Simulate the challenging obstacles presented by natural hedges. The testing grounds were strategically equipped with robust logs. Over an intensive period of 6 weeks, a dedicated team meticulously undertook a comprehensive series of 23 glider crash tests, each involving a Jeep securely encased within its specialized protective crate. The initial 5 trials proceeded with remarkable precision and without a single malfunction. In each instance, the gliders predictably disintegrated upon impact, their fragile structures yielding as intended, while the robust crates effectively shattered, absorbing the immense kinetic energy. Crucially, in every one of these successful early demonstrations, the Jeeps emerged remarkably unscathed and fully operational, capable of being driven away from the wreckage under their own power. However, the 6th test in the sequence introduced unforeseen complications, presenting a formidable challenge to the nascent design. The pilot, regrettably, misjudged his approach, bringing the glider in at an excessive velocity. Upon initial impact, the aircraft violently cartwheeled, tumbling uncontrollably across the landing zone. In a terrifying spectacle, the crated Jeep within was subjected to 2 complete end-over-end rotations. Onlookers and engineers, witnessing the dramatic wreckage, braced themselves for nothing less than total destruction of the vehicle. Yet, as the billowing dust gradually settled and the chaotic scene became clear, they discovered the Jeep resting remarkably on its side, still firmly secured within the mangled remnants of its protective enclosure. Recovery crews promptly righted the vehicle, conducting a swift but thorough inspection for damage. Their findings were astonishingly minimal, merely a bent front bumper and a solitary cracked headlight lens. The engine, to everyone's amazement, roared to life, and the Jeep was fully capable of independent movement. This harrowing incident unequivocally demonstrated that even a complete, violent glider tumble had failed to exceed the robust crate's inherent safeguarding capabilities. It was test number 12, however, that delivered the most compelling and dramatic validation of Putnam's ingenious design. During its final approach, the glider was suddenly buffeted by a fierce crosswind, causing its right wing to dip sharply and impact the ground with tremendous force asymmetrically. The aircraft's fuselage instantly spun a violent 180 degrees, fracturing cleanly through its central section, and the entire tail assembly separated completely, tumbling away. The front half, which still securely contained the crated Jeep, continued its destructive momentum, plowing forward an additional 50 feet, shedding its fabric skin and wooden structural ribs in a violent cascade. The scene, with its widespread wreckage and debris, resembled nothing less than the aftermath of a catastrophic explosion, with fragments strewn across an astonishing 100-yard radius. Recovery crews faced a daunting task, requiring a full 20 minutes simply to pinpoint the Jeep's location amidst the mangled wreckage. Yet, when they finally reached it, they discovered the vehicle largely undamaged, sitting remarkably preserved within the shattered fragments of its protective crate, though thoroughly encrusted with splintered wood and torn fabric. A mere 15 minutes later, the engine was successfully started and running smoothly. The test pilot, who had miraculously emerged from the catastrophic crash with only minor bruises, stood beside the operational Jeep, a wide grin spreading across his face as he chuckled with utter astonishment and profound disbelief. It is important to note, however, that not every single test achieved unblemished success. Test number 17, for instance, exposed a critical deficiency in the original floor skid design. During its landing, the glider unexpectedly encountered a pronounced depression within the test field. Instead of gliding smoothly over the irregularity, the skids became immovably lodged, causing an abrupt and violent deceleration that consequently warped the Jeep's rear axle. Palmer Putnam, demonstrating his characteristic ingenuity and dedication, immediately dedicated 3 intensive days to meticulously re-engineering the skid attachment points. His solution involved the strategic addition of beveled edges, precisely engineered to mitigate obstruction and ensure smooth operation even when encountering significantly uneven terrain. This modified design was subsequently integrated into Test 20, and the previously identified problem was completely eradicated, validating the swift and effective corrective action. By the close of June, the comprehensive test program had achieved an impressive 87% operational recovery percentage. This statistic signified that an extraordinary 87% of the crated Jeeps, despite enduring severe crash impacts, were recovered from the impact zones in fully operational status, a monumental improvement over the dismal 30% rate previously observed with conventional packing methods. The overwhelming and irrefutable evidence left the Quartermaster Corps with no credible grounds to dispute the results. Putnam's innovative crate demonstrably functioned as intended. However, the acknowledgement of the efficacy of this groundbreaking engineering solution did not, regrettably, translate into a corresponding recognition of the individual inventor himself. In official reports meticulously filed and submitted to the War Department, the significant innovation was conspicuously attributed to the collective efforts of Quartermaster Corps engineers, purportedly acting in conjunction with unnamed civilian consultants. Palmer Putnam's name, the true architect of this life-saving design, was consistently relegated to the obscurity of footnotes, conspicuously absent from the prominent headlines and primary acknowledgments. The deep-seated challenge of entrenched organizational ego, unfortunately, had not dissipated. While senior military officers unequivocally acknowledged that this ingenious design possessed the potential to significantly preserve military personnel and secure strategic victories on the battlefield, they were, nonetheless, utterly disinclined to bestow prominent recognition upon an outsider. This reluctance stemmed from the uncomfortable reality that Putnam, through his undeniable success, had inadvertently demonstrated the fallibility and shortcomings of their own internal engineering experts, a blow to institutional pride that they were unwilling to publicly endorse. With the design's effectiveness irrefutably established, manufacturing agreements were swiftly issued to major timber processing facilities located across Oregon and Michigan. By July of 1943, these factories had commenced an impressive mass production effort, churning out these vital containers at a formidable weekly output of 200 units. Concurrently, comprehensive training manuals were meticulously developed and distributed, serving to instruct assembly crews on the exact engineering requirements and precise specifications necessary for constructing each crate with unwavering accuracy and consistency. Having completed his pivotal work, Palmer Putnam quietly returned to his home in Vermont. His extraordinary contribution to the war effort was officially classified, effectively designated as a state secret, and his indispensable role was deliberately minimized by the military establishment. Yet, his groundbreaking engineering solution, despite the lack of public acknowledgement for its creator, was now poised to confront its ultimate and most unforgiving crucible, the brutal realities of live warfare. Operation Overlord, the monumental invasion of Normandy, stands unparalleled as the most extensive seaborne assault ever executed in the annals of military history. Yet, the perilous beach landings were merely the initial phase of a far grander and more complex strategy. Allied planners, the strategic architects of the invasion, possessed a keen understanding that formidable German armored divisions would converge rapidly to encircle and contain the nascent beachhead. Should the invasion forces become isolated within a confined littoral zone, the entire ambitious operation ran the grave risk of degenerating into a catastrophic slaughter. Consequently, the rapid penetration of the interior, pushing beyond the coastal defenses, was deemed absolutely paramount for success. In the immediate aftermath of the initial disembarkation, Allied ground troops were tasked with a critical mission: to swiftly advance beyond the coastal barriers, secure vital intersections, effectively interdict German logistical pathways, and establish robust defensive perimeters far within enemy-held lands. Paratroopers, deploying via airborne insertion in the pre-dawn darkness, were designated to spearhead this crucial inland thrust, descending behind enemy lines hours before the main amphibious landings. Their audacious mission was to sow chaos and disrupt German defenses from within. The crucial understanding gained from previous airborne operations in Sicily, Salerno, and Italy was unequivocally clear. Paratroopers deployed without adequate vehicle support were rendered little more than vulnerable, stationary prey. Recognizing this critical deficiency, the esteemed 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions formally requisitioned a staggering 1,400 jeeps specifically for their D-Day operations, a heretofore unheard-of quantity for airborne delivery. Each of these versatile vehicles was earmarked for a vital role, whether transporting a heavy weaponry team, an indirect fire support unit, or serving as an essential logistical replenishment transport. Furthermore, the divisions also requested 75mm pack howitzers, formidable anti-tank guns, and critical medical supplies, all of which were entirely contingent upon the availability of mobile transport to move them swiftly and efficiently across the battlefield. The strategic implications of these vehicles were profound. Without the critical mobility afforded by these jeeps, the paratroopers would be compelled to regroup defensively within their immediate landing areas, effectively remaining static and vulnerable while awaiting the uncertain arrival of conventional ground forces, a delay that could potentially extend for days. Conversely, armed with these indispensable vehicles, they possessed the capability to launch swift offensive assaults against German strongpoints, erect strategic impediments miles inland to disrupt enemy movements, and engender widespread disarray and chaos throughout the German rear areas, transforming their tactical presence into a dynamic threat. Ultimately, the success of the overarching military strategy for the airborne component of Operation Overlord was entirely predicated upon a single, critical unknown: whether Palmer Putnam's ingeniously designed crates would perform reliably and effectively under the unforgiving crucible of live warfare when deployed in vast numbers, and, crucially, amidst the relentless peril of hostile enemy engagements. The monumental task of cargo loading commenced with fervent intensity on June 5, unfolding across numerous airfields scattered throughout southern England. Each crate, having been meticulously constructed at advanced logistical hubs, already contained its designated jeep, which had been carefully driven inside and fastened rigorously in accordance with Putnam's precise engineering blueprints. Ground crews, operating with practiced efficiency, then employed a combination of powerful winches and specialized loading ramps to carefully position these crated vehicles into the waiting CG-4A gliders. This intricate process typically consumed approximately 45 minutes per glider. With hundreds of gliders being loaded simultaneously, the entire operation mirrored the synchronized efficiency of a vast industrial production line, crews moving with meticulous coordination. They diligently checked cable tensions, verified the correct placement of critical shear pin installations, and confirmed that the resilient rubber mounting blocks had not deteriorated during storage. A singular misstep in this meticulous preparation held dire consequences, potentially resulting in a catastrophically damaged vehicle and, more critically, isolated, vulnerable personnel stranded behind enemy lines. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, precisely at 0330 hours, a full 3 hours prior to the main amphibious beach landings, the first gliders were released over the skies of Normandy. They descended in successive formations, typically comprising 20 or 30 aircraft at a time, having been detached from their aerial tugs at altitudes ranging between 600 and 1,000 feet. This silent, airborne armada initiated the crucial inland phase of the invasion. However, the rigorous training exercises conducted at Wright Field, for all their thoroughness, were utterly incapable of simulating the sheer pandemonium of actual wartime disembarkations. Intense anti-aircraft fire tore violently through the glider formations, with incendiary rounds streaking across the night sky, illuminating the perilous descent. Faced with this deadly barrage, some pilots were forced to take desperate avoidance maneuvers, throwing their gliders into violent descents and abrupt directional changes that imposed stresses upon the critical payload far exceeding engineered limits. Other pilots discovered their designated landing zones either shrouded in thick plumes of smoke or already pockmarked by heavy naval shellfire. Consequently, they were compelled to land wherever feasible, often choosing fields deliberately inundated by German defensive measures, pastures strategically impaled with menacing anti-airborne obstacles known colloquially as Rommel's asparagus. or even the confined gardens nestled behind ancient Norman farmhouses. In a particularly harrowing incident, Glider 17, assigned to the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, collided head-on with a formidable stone wall at maximum velocity. The nose of the aircraft imploded violently, the cockpit was crushed, and both pilots tragically perished instantaneously. The fuselage compressed telescopically backward, and the entire tail assembly ripped free and detached completely. When recovery troops reached the wreckage approximately 20 minutes later, their grim expectation was to discover nothing more than a mangled heap of unusable scrap metal. However, the crate had performed precisely according to its engineered purpose, disintegrating and scattering wooden panels over a considerable 50-foot expanse of the field. Amidst this debris, the Jeep sat, wheels mired in mud, but astonishingly, it was mechanically intact. The troops, with palpable relief and urgency, started the engine, backed the vehicle out of the wreckage, swiftly affixed a formidable .30 caliber machine gun, and had it fully operational on the battlefield within 60 minutes, a testament to its resilience and the crate's protective capacity. Another notable incident involved Glider 31 from the 101st Airborne Division, which made an emergency descent into a severely waterlogged area near St. Miraglise. The aviator was presented with no viable alternative, as all other available landing sites presented even greater hazards. The glider, upon impact, skipped across the standing water with an unsettling lightness, much like a skipping stone, before striking a submerged fence post and consequently plowing face first into the soft, yielding mud. Predictably, water immediately inundated the cargo bay. Recovery crews, wading through chest-high liquid, fully anticipated discovering a completely submerged and inoperable power unit. Intriguingly, while Putnam's crate design had not specifically engineered for aquatic impact scenarios, the inherent elevation provided by its robust floor skids had maintained the Jeep at a sufficient height, ensuring that the engine's crucial air induction system remained free of moisture. After being pulled to solid terrain with the assistance of another Jeep, and with a quick procedure to purge the carburetor, the vehicle astonishingly started and ran without issue. It must be acknowledged, however, that not every single delivery achieved its intended outcome. Some gliders unfortunately impacted with such devastating force, and under such extreme circumstances, that even the formidable protection afforded by Putnam's engineering was incapable of preserving the vital payload. These catastrophic failures encompassed a range of scenarios, including gliders that collided with arboreal obstacles and disintegrated airlift before ever reaching the ground, gliders that descended directly into enemy-laid explosive zones, triggering destructive munitions against which the crate offered no defense, and gliders that were incinerated subsequent to impact from flammable projectiles during their hazardous approach. Crucially, however, such devastating losses accounted for a minority, specifically less than 15% of all deliveries. The overwhelming majority, a remarkable 85%, successfully placed fully operational transport assets directly into the possession of airborne troops within mere hours of their hazardous landings. By 0900 hours on that pivotal June 6th, an astounding total of over 2,100 Jeeps were actively deployed deep within enemy territory. These indispensable vehicles were immediately pressed into service, maneuvering formidable anti-armor weaponry into strategic ambush points against German panzers, swiftly transporting injured personnel to forward medical facilities, and delivering vital munitions to dispersed forces. They rapidly became the dynamic offensive capability that profoundly transformed scattered paratrooper elements into a unified and exceptionally effective fighting unit. In their subsequent after-action reports, German commanders extensively documented their profound bewilderment regarding the unexpected nature of the Allied airborne assault. They had anticipated encountering thinly equipped foot soldiers, forces that could be readily encircled and annihilated. Instead, they confronted highly mobile, motorized formations possessing significant offensive capability and rapid maneuverability, units that, to their consternation, materialized with improbable swiftness far into their rear echelons. The conventional enemy countermeasure to airborne landings, to dispatch armored units to overwhelm the landing areas, instead encountered unexpected mobile ambuscades conducted by jeep-mounted troops miles from their anticipated positions. The dynamic pace of operations upon which Allied strategists had boldly wagered. A tempo wholly contingent upon the successful deployment of vehicles via air had, against all odds, definitively come to fruition. Meanwhile, Palmer Putnam, having quietly returned to his tranquil life in Vermont, remained entirely unaware of the profound success of his innovative design under the ultimate crucible of combat. The inventor, whose genius had enabled such a pivotal strategic advantage, would only discover the news through public press reports, reading about the triumphant impact of his work in newspapers a considerable period thereafter, an ironic postscript to his vital, yet uncredited, contribution. Weeks after the pivotal events, he would merely encounter their echoes in the pages of daily newspapers. The momentous conclusion of the global conflict arrived in Europe during May of 1945, with the Pacific theater finally following suit that August. As the vast military apparatus underwent a comprehensive demobilization, an unprecedented deluge of millions of pages of meticulously classified documents found their way into secure archival storage, a substantial portion of which bore the restrictive stamps of restricted or confidential. Among these sensitive records were the vital Wright field test reports, the exhaustive D-Day after-action assessments, and various pieces of correspondence that painstakingly detailed Palmer Putnam's crucial contributions to the nascent field of airborne logistics. The authoritative Chronicle of Airborne Operations, formally issued by the War Department in 1947, dedicated a mere 3 pages to the subject of vehicles delivered by glider. This official history briefly acknowledged the innovative packaging solutions pioneered by engineers within the Quartermaster Corps, and included a concise technical overview of the revolutionary shock-absorbing crates. Yet, conspicuously absent from this entire document was Palmer Putnam's name. For the purposes of institutional recognition and credit, the entire groundbreaking innovation was unequivocally attributed solely to the military establishment, effectively erasing any civilian involvement. Such a pattern of omission was not at all uncommon within the broader landscape of post-war military historiography. The armed forces had long maintained a steadfast tradition of minimizing or entirely overlooking civilian contributions, a practice primarily aimed at preserving a powerful public image of inherent military self-sufficiency and comprehensive capability. According to this prevailing narrative, combat engineers were exclusively responsible for constructing essential bridges, military scientists alone developed crucial radar technology, and Army cryptographers single-handedly broke complex enemy codes. This was the simplified story consistently presented to the public, and it must be conceded that in many instances, this portrayal accurately reflected the factual reality. However, the deliberate erasure of Putnam's specific role transcended the typical bounds of standard bureaucratic credit hoarding. A profound sense of institutional embarrassment was deeply entwined with this particular situation. Initially, the Quartermaster Corps had vociferously rejected his ingenious design, deriding it as inherently wasteful, and summarily dismissing Putnam as merely an impractical civilian. Yet, when sheer operational desperation compelled them to finally conduct tests, and the design performed with brilliant efficacy, the ensuing institutional reaction was notably devoid of gratitude. Instead, it manifested as a hushed resentment and a meticulously coordinated endeavor to systematically revise the official historical account. Putnam himself exhibited no inclination to contend for public recognition or official accolades. Following the cessation of hostilities, he quietly redirected his considerable intellect back to his pioneering wind energy projects, concurrently engaging in the development of hydroelectric systems. He also authored and disseminated scholarly papers on renewable energy, concepts that were remarkably decades in advance of contemporary thought. During the 1950s, his seminal work on wind power generation was published as a book, which swiftly ascended to the status of a foundational text within the nascent field. When professional colleagues occasionally inquired about his wartime contributions, he would acknowledge having consulted for the military, but steadfastly refrain from divulging any specific details. Whether his reticence stemmed from having executed non-disclosure agreements, or if he simply exercised a personal preference for discretion remains ambiguous based on the extant records. Nevertheless, the individual who had ingeniously resolved one of the war's most pressing logistical challenges gradually receded into relative obscurity, even as his brilliant solution seamlessly transitioned into widespread, standard military practice. While its originator might have been forgotten, the fundamental design of the crate itself certainly did not vanish. Astute military logistics planners readily acknowledged its inherent value and efficacy, even if they steadfastly refused to formally credit its true inventor. Throughout the latter half of the 1940s, and extending well into the period of the Korean War, numerous adaptations and variations of Putnam's original shock-absorbing container began to feature prominently in official supply manuals. The distinctive honeycomb panel structure, the groundbreaking principle of progressive collapse, and the ingenious method of cable-limited energy dissipation were all progressively integrated as standard features within the established protocols for airborne cargo packaging systems. By the advent of the 1960s, the original design had undergone such profound evolution that it was virtually unrecognizable from its initial iteration. Contemporary, advanced materials had supplanted the rudimentary plywood and steel cable components. Engineers had incorporated innovative elements such as crushable aluminum sections, highly efficient foam energy absorbers, and sophisticated pneumatic cushions. Yet, despite these significant material and structural enhancements, the fundamental conceptual underpinning remained inviolate. The imperative to safeguard valuable cargo was achieved through the deliberate and controlled destruction of the container itself, executed in a meticulously predetermined sequence. A pivotal turning point arrived with the passage of the Freedom of Information Act and the subsequent waves of extensive declassification that swept through the 1970s. Diligent researchers, meticulously sifting through the newly accessible trove of World War II documents housed at the venerable National Archives, fortuitously uncovered the critical Wright field test reports. Within the obscure footnotes and supplementary appendices of these once secret papers, the name Palmer Putnam finally began to emerge from obscurity. Subsequently, an astute graduate student, while meticulously crafting a dissertation focused on wartime logistics innovations, painstakingly traced the original rejection letters from the Quartermaster Corps, located Putnam's initial, visionary proposals, and systematically reconstructed the complete historical timeline of his involvement. It was not until 1978, a full 35 years subsequent to the actual events, that a modest academic article finally surfaced in a specialized military history journal. This scholarly publication at last established the unequivocal link between Putnam and the groundbreaking airborne Jeep delivery system. Tragically, by this time, Putnam himself had already passed away 2 years prior. He thus never had the opportunity to learn that dedicated historians had successfully unearthed and brought to light his long-buried, yet profoundly impactful, contribution to the war effort. This belated exposure instigated a modest, yet significant, reassessment within specialized military engineering circles. Subsequent articles published in various Army logistics publications openly conceded that the long-held standard narrative regarding the innovation had been fundamentally incomplete. It was now acknowledged that civilian ingenuity had, in fact, played a far more substantial and pivotal role than had ever been previously stated or recognized. Nevertheless, this crucial historical correction regrettably reached only highly circumscribed audiences, primarily specialists, academic historians, and engineers actively engaged in the study of legacy military systems. The general public, by and large, remained entirely unaware of this compelling story. Popular World War II documentaries, for instance, continued to concentrate almost exclusively on dramatic battles and the valor of prominent generals, rather than on the intricate work of pioneering packaging engineers. The dominant heroism narrative of the era simply did not possess the narrative space to accommodate the story of a visionary wind energy consultant from Vermont who had ingeniously designed wooden boxes. What undeniably endured and proliferated, transcending the obscurity of its creator, was the ingenious technology itself. Contemporary airdrop containers, routinely employed by the United States military, can directly trace their fundamental lineage back to Palmer Putnam's pioneering principles. For instance, the container delivery system, formally introduced in the 1980s, leverages an advanced methodology of layered energy absorption to meticulously safeguard cargo during demanding low-altitude parachute drops. Similarly, the Army's low-velocity airdrop system, conceived and developed during the 1990s, ingeniously utilizes the concept of controlled structural collapse to effectively cushion the impact of heavy equipment. Beyond the military sphere, even civilian applications readily adopted this groundbreaking concept, evident in the design of automotive crumple zones, the specialized packaging engineered for fragile electronics, and the robust construction of crash-tested shipping containers. The profound idea that Palmer Putnam had so passionately advocated, often against considerable institutional resistance, the counterintuitive notion that true protection is achieved through strategic, controlled destruction rather than through mere rigid strength, ultimately became a foundational tenet across a multitude of diverse industries. As late as 2003, a modest historical marker was finally erected at a wind farm in Vermont, specifically at the site where Putnam had diligently conducted his pioneering turbine experiments during the 1930s. The commemorative plaque appropriately highlighted his significant work in renewable energy, yet it allocated only a solitary sentence to his profound World War II contributions, stating simply, "Developed innovative cargo packaging systems for military airborne operations." This brief inscription offered no elaborating details, no explanation of the profound implications of his work, nor any insight into why it held such critical importance. It was, in essence, merely a footnote, precisely the diminished status to which institutional memory had ultimately relegated him. Consequently, the myriad soldiers who successfully extricated their jeeps from the remnants of glider wrecks remained entirely unaware of the individual whose ingenuity had made their survival possible. Similarly, generations of engineers, who have progressively refined and built upon his foundational principles over 8 subsequent decades, seldom possess knowledge of the original genesis of this vital technology. And herein lies the ultimate irony. The most profoundly successful military innovations are frequently those that seamlessly integrate into the operational background, becoming so fundamentally standard that their origins are rarely, if ever, questioned. Let us now project ourselves forward in time to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, in the year 2010. As dusk settles over the expansive desert landscape, a formidable C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft gracefully ascends into the twilight sky. Its vast cargo bay is meticulously laden with what the Air Force designates a Type 5 airdrop platform, essentially a robust wooden pallet securely cradling a Humvee, itself meticulously encased in specialized protective packaging. The colossal aircraft steadily climbs to an operational altitude of 200 feet, then levels out, and the experienced loadmaster initiates the precise release sequence. Parachutes billow open in the slipstream, the platform smoothly exits the cargo bay, and a mere 30 seconds later, it impacts a designated desert landing zone with a controlled velocity of 24 feet per second. Upon impact, the outer packaging systematically crushes in a series of predetermined stages, allowing the valuable vehicle contained within to absorb impact forces that would otherwise warp an unprotected frame into irreparable scrap metal. Soldiers arrive at the drop zone approximately 15 minutes later, swiftly cut away the now destroyed packaging, and promptly drive the fully operational Humvee directly to a forward operating base. Palmer Putnam had tragically passed away a full 34 years prior to this particular airdrop event, yet his fundamental engineering DNA is indelibly etched into every intricate layer of that sophisticated protective system. The contemporary container delivery system represents a direct evolutionary descendant of Putnam's original wooden crates, having been meticulously refined over 7 decades through advancements in material science. Whereas his initial designs utilized plywood panels, current systems now incorporate aerospace-grade honeycomb aluminum, precisely engineered to collapse at predetermined crush loads. Similarly, the original steel cables have been replaced by advanced aramid fiber webbing, featuring meticulously calculated tensile limits. Instead of rudimentary rubber blocks, modern designs employ specialized closed-cell foam, precisely rated for specific energy absorption per cubic inch. However, if one were to divest these systems of their advanced modern materials, the underlying architectural brilliance remains strikingly identical. Outer layers are designed to fail first. Progressive energy dissipation is achieved through meticulously controlled destruction. Sophisticated suspension systems effectively decouple the precious cargo from direct impact forces, and robust floor assemblies are engineered to slide and absorb shock rather than merely transferring it. Further advancing the capabilities of airborne logistics, the Joint Precision Airdrop System, JPADS, formally unveiled in 2004, integrated sophisticated GPS guidance technology directly into cargo parachutes. This revolutionary enhancement enabled pinpoint delivery of essential supplies to military personnel stationed in remote or inaccessible locations, areas that could not be safely reached by conventional ground convoys. This remarkable system is capable of deploying a substantial 5 tons of provisions to within a mere 150 feet of its intended target, even from a staggering altitude of 25,000 feet. However, such unparalleled accuracy would be rendered utterly meaningless if the precious cargo arrived in a damaged or unusable state. Crucially, every single JPADS container incorporates direct descendants of Putnam's original collapse-in-sequence design. Throughout extensive operations conducted in Iraq and Afghanistan, this system successfully delivered in excess of 5 million pounds of vital cargo, achieving an astounding 98% serviceability rate. This metric signifies that an overwhelming 98% of all dropped items arrived completely intact and immediately usable. Such an impressive operational record stands as the most unequivocal validation of Putnam's profound core insight, that by correctly engineering the destruction of the container, absolutely nothing critical within it will be destroyed. The foundational principle has, in fact, been embraced and further extrapolated within numerous civilian applications. Contemporary automotive design, for instance, now mandatorily incorporates crumple zones, meticulously engineered to absorb the immense energy generated during a collision while simultaneously preserving the structural integrity of rigid passenger compartments, a design philosophy precisely mirroring Putnam's ingenious approach to safeguarding Jeeps within collapsing crates. Even the ubiquitous iPhone resting in one's pocket is ensconced within packaging specifically designed with analogous stage collapse structures. Foam inserts precisely calibrated to compress in a sequential manner, thereby offering unparalleled protection to the delicate glass and intricate electronics during the rigors of shipping impacts. Furthermore, Amazon's widely recognized frustration-free packaging initiative consciously employs the very same underlying energy dissipation mathematics. The sheer ubiquity of this concept has, paradoxically, rendered it largely invisible to the casual observer. Individuals rarely pause to contemplate the intricate reasons why fragile items routinely survive the unpredictable stresses of shipping, nor do they often question the sophisticated engineering principles that meticulously ensure their safe arrival. Contemporary humanitarian missions vividly demonstrate the extensive capabilities of this remarkable engineering. In instances where cataclysmic events such as devastating earthquakes or ferocious hurricanes render traditional terrestrial routes impassable, the aerial delivery of vital provisions frequently emerges as the sole viable recourse. Global organizations, including the venerable United Nations, alongside numerous national armed forces, meticulously curate vast inventories of specialized airdrop containers, meticulously engineered to endure the rigors of uncontrolled descents and impact within austere, unprepped environments. Essential items, ranging from critical medical apparatus and sophisticated water purification modules to robust emergency shelter kits, are all meticulously encased within sophisticated progeny of Palmer C. Putnam's pioneering World War II-era designs. Following the catastrophic 2010 Haiti earthquake, for example, aircraft from the U.S. Air Force, specifically their formidable C-17 Globemaster III transports, executed more than 200 precision airdrops into the beleaguered capital of Port-au-Prince, deploying advanced, GPS-guided cargo systems. The protective encasement that meticulously safeguarded these indispensable provisions, thereby enabling the critical distribution of potable water and life-saving antibiotics to the beleaguered populace, directly adhered to fundamental design tenets initially conceived and meticulously sketched on the drafting table of a visionary Vermont engineer back in the pivotal year of 1942. A poignant irony, however, lies in the fact that Putnam himself exhibited no inclination to propel his groundbreaking invention beyond its immediate, pressing military utility during the conflict. His modus operandi was straightforward: identify an engineering conundrum, devise an elegant solution, and promptly pivot to the subsequent intellectual pursuit. Following the cessation of hostilities, his professional endeavors shifted dramatically, concentrating on the nascent field of wind energy. He dedicated himself to presciently forecasting the eventual capacity of turbine technology to harness the invisible forces of nature, envisioning its potential to produce substantial quantities of electricity from perpetually replenishing sources. This pioneering work, much like his ingenious cargo crate blueprint, was profoundly ahead of its contemporary era and, regrettably, largely overlooked or undervalued throughout his active professional life. Yet, in the present day, vast wind farms contribute more than 10% of the United States' total electrical power, a testament to his foresight, and Putnam's foundational research papers are now frequently referenced within authoritative academic treatises on turbine engineering. He was, By all accounts, an individual perpetually operating at least 3 decades in advance of prevailing thought, routinely disregarded by his peers, and ultimately proving correct long after the opportunity for personal commendation or widespread public acknowledgement had irrevocably passed. Ultimately, the armed forces did extend a form of acknowledgement to Putnam, albeit through a rather understated and bureaucratic channel. In the year 1991, the esteemed Army Quartermaster Museum, situated at Fort Lee, Virginia, inaugurated a modest exhibition dedicated to advancements in airborne logistical strategies. Among its carefully curated displays, one particular showcase features an intricately detailed scale model of a CG-4A glider, presented with a revealing cutaway section that exposes a meticulously crated jeep nestled within its fuselage. The accompanying informational placard unequivocally attributes the conceptualization and refinement of this pivotal design to Palmer C. Putnam, identified simply as a civilian engineer. This constitutes a rather subdued tribute, emblematic of an institutional footnote designed to rectify a historical oversight without, however, publicizing the correction with any significant fanfare. Visitors who pause to absorb the details presented on this unassuming plaque glean a piece of knowledge that eludes the vast majority of the populace, that one of the most crucial logistical breakthroughs of the Second World War originated not from the strategic acumen of military strategists or the expansive research departments of defense contractors, but rather from the insightful mind of a wind energy consultant. This individual possessed the profound understanding that, on occasion, to truly safeguard something of immense value, one must paradoxically permit its surrounding protective elements to yield and fracture in a precisely orchestrated manner. That very principle, initially scorned as extravagant and unfeasible in the crucible of 1942, has now become so deeply ingrained and foundational within the fabric of contemporary engineering disciplines that its once controversial genesis has been entirely effaced from collective memory. And perhaps therein lies his most profound and enduring legacy, not the transient glimmer of celebrity, nor the fleeting satisfaction of public commendation, but rather the triumph of an idea so utterly successful and universally adopted that it has, ironically, rendered itself imperceptible.